The polite applause had barely faded when I noticed their empty seats. Not just empty but actively ignored, like a gaping maw in the otherwise perfect seating chart I'd spent weeks agonizing over. The silence from those two spots felt louder than any sound in the room. It was the culmination of months of planning, a significant chunk of my savings, and a vision I'd poured my heart into. And there, front and center, were the spaces that were supposed to be occupied by the two people who had shaped my entire existence. The small, elegantly printed place cards bearing their names, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, sat starkly under the soft glow of the chandeliers, as if mocking my meticulous efforts. It had started with a casual mention, a proud announcement of the upcoming event. My parents, of course, had been enthusiastic, their initial reactions a flurry of excited pronouncements. "Oh, darling, how wonderful!" my mother had exclaimed, her voice bright. My father, usually more reserved, had chimed in with a hearty, "We'll certainly be there, proud as punch." They talked about dressing up and meeting everyone, their words painting a picture of enthusiastic participation. They'd even offered suggestions on the menu, a few tentative ideas about appetizers and a particular wine I should consider, which I'd politely incorporated, grateful for any small sign of engagement, any tangible proof that they were invested in this endeavor as much as I was. Then came the subtle shifts, almost imperceptible at first, like hairline cracks appearing in a seemingly solid structure. "Oh, are the Andersons going to be there? I haven't seen them in ages. It would be so lovely to catch up," my mother mentioned one afternoon, her tone laced with a genuine, or perhaps feigned, interest in reconnecting with old acquaintances. Or, I was thinking, maybe Brenda and Robert could use a night out. They've been so stressed with their new business venture. It would be a wonderful opportunity for them to relax. Each comment, seemingly innocuous, chipped away at the foundation of their promised presence, subtly diverting the focus from our shared celebration to their wider social circle. I brushed it off, telling myself they were just being social, connecting dots, making sure all their friends knew about this significant milestone in my life. I was so caught up in the logistics, the vendors, the guest list, the tangible proof of my effort, the undeniable evidence of my hard work, that I missed the slow, deliberate erosion of their commitment. The vendor contracts, the tasting menus, the endless spreadsheets felt more real, more concrete than the ephemeral nature of their spoken intentions. The invitations had gone out, impeccably designed and printed on thick cardstock, a tactile representation of the importance I placed on this occasion. I'd personally hand-delivered theirs, a small gesture of importance, or so I thought, a way to imbue the act of receiving the invitation with the same gravitas as the event itself. They'd admired the calligraphy, a delicate flourish that had taken hours to perfect. They commented on the paper quality, the satisfying weight of it in their hands. And then, almost as an afterthought, a casual query that felt oddly misplaced, they asked, "Darling, could you confirm the number of guests attending for us? Just so we can tell," mentioning a friend's name, "how incredibly well it's all going." It was a peculiar request, a subtle indication that their perspective was already shifting from participants to observers, and a tiny prickle of unease began to surface, a faint tremor beneath the surface of my excitement. But I pushed it down, attributing it to their pride in my accomplishments, their desire to share good news. I was the host. I was orchestrating this. Their presence was a given, a cornerstone of the entire edifice. The days leading up to it were a blur of final confirmations, a symphony of ringing telephones and terse email exchanges. Last-minute floral arrangements were tweaked, the lighting script finalized, and the nervous anticipation that always precedes a large undertaking settled deep in my bones. I kept picturing their faces when they walked in, the pride they would feel, not just for me, but for being associated with such an event. I'd even bought them a small framed piece of art as a parting gift, something I hoped would serve as a tangible reminder of the night, a small token of appreciation for their support, even as that support felt increasingly conditional. The evening itself was a controlled whirlwind of activity, a meticulously orchestrated ballet of service and sociability. Guests arrived impeccably dressed, a testament to the care I'd put into every detail, from the invitations to the dress code suggestion. The venue sparkled, transformed by strategic lighting and elegant drapery. The music, a curated playlist designed to foster conversation and a sense of occasion, was just a gentle hum beneath the murmur of voices. The waiters moved with practiced efficiency, their movements fluid and unobtrusive. I circulated, a hostess's smile plastered on my face, a mask of composed delight. I made introductions, connecting people who I knew would find common ground, ensuring everyone felt welcome and valued. It was by all accounts a resounding success. The food was raved about, the chef beaming at the positive feedback. The ambience was perfect, a sophisticated yet warm embrace. The company was engaging, a vibrant mix of familiar faces and interesting new acquaintances. People commented on my meticulous planning, my eye for detail, my ability to pull off something so significant with such apparent ease. It was the kind of praise that felt earned, a validation of all the late nights and early mornings, the countless decisions, the sheer willpower that had brought this vision to life. But with every glowing compliment, with every admiring glance at the venue, a small cold knot tightened in my stomach. Every time I scanned the room, searching for familiar faces, searching for the two people who were supposed to be my anchors in this sea of unfamiliarity, the knot grew larger, a physical manifestation of my mounting anxiety. The 2 seats reserved with a small elegant place card remained stubbornly vacant. No phone call, no text message, no explanation. Just empty space where their presence should have been. A void that grew more profound with each passing minute. The music swelled, laughter pealed, but for me those empty seats cast a long, unsettling shadow. Then I overheard it. A hushed conversation near the bar, a familiar laugh, a name I recognized, one of my parents' oldest acquaintances, someone they hadn't seen in years, a name that had been conspicuously absent from my meticulously compiled guest list. Curiosity, a dark and unwelcome companion, tugged at me, a primal instinct to understand this anomaly. I excused myself from a group of admiring guests, feigning a need to check on the kitchen, a plausible reason to momentarily disengage. I casually drifted towards the sound, my heart beginning to thud a little faster. And there they were, my parents beaming, their faces alight with a peculiar kind of self-satisfaction, flanked by a couple I vaguely recognized from distant family gatherings, being introduced to the event by my mother with an effusive, almost theatrical flourish. "Isn't it just marvelous? Our child truly outdid themselves this time," she declared, her voice carrying across the immediate vicinity. They were occupying seats not just near the front but my front row seats. The seats that were supposed to be theirs, the seats I had personally reserved for them, with their names printed on those elegant cards. They were explaining, with the kind of casual pride that only comes from utterly misplaced confidence and a profound lack of self-awareness, how they had invited their friends to share the experience, as they knew so many people would appreciate this kind of thing. They hadn't even mentioned my name, not in passing, not in recognition of my effort, my vision, my investment. It was their friends' experience, an evening that they were generously allowing to unfold in a space I had curated, financed, and poured my entire being into. They were presenting my achievement as their own generosity, a subtle but devastating act of appropriation. A wave of something akin to nausea washed over me, the carefully constructed edifice of my composure threatening to crumble. It was followed by a chilling clarity, a brutal, unvarnished understanding. It wasn't just a matter of them being absent, of their disappointing lack of presence. It was a deliberate act of appropriation, a profound dismissal of my efforts, a clear message that their social connections, their perceived generosity to outsiders, trumped their own child's milestone, their own child's deeply personal celebration. The $15,000 I'd invested wasn't just for me. It was meant to be a shared celebration, a testament to family, a moment of collective pride. And they had effectively sold my seats at my expense to strangers, their own social currency derived from my financial and emotional outlay. The realization was a cold, hard blow. I didn't say anything. Not then. The words, sharp and accusatory, caught in my throat. I couldn't. The carefully constructed facade of composure would have shattered, and I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of a public scene, the spectacle of their child's humiliation. Instead, I retreated, a silent withdrawal from the immediate vicinity. The taste of ash was in my mouth, a bitter counterpoint to the celebratory champagne being sipped around me. I thanked the guests, I managed the servers, I smiled through the remaining hours, the practiced movements of a host determined to see her event through. But a subtle shift had occurred within me, a fundamental recalibrating. The initial sting of hurt, sharp and raw, began to harden into something else entirely. A quiet, steely resolve, a determination to navigate this new landscape with an unyielding strength. The following week was a strange, muted period, a time of quiet reflection and internal processing. My parents called, of course, their voices full of effusive praise for the event, for the wonderful time they and their friends had, for how much everyone enjoyed themselves. They spoke of the lovely atmosphere and the delicious food, as if they were impartial observers who had stumbled upon a brilliant social gathering, their own involvement minimal and tangential. They asked about the financial aspect with a vague curiosity, a throwaway comment like, "Must have cost a pretty penny, dear," before swiftly changing the subject back to how much their friends, the Andersons, had appreciated the evening, how they'd been talking about it ever since. They never asked if I had enjoyed it, if it had gone according to plan for me. The conversation was a masterclass in selective amnesia, a carefully constructed narrative where their role was that of benevolent patrons, generous hosts to their own friends, and mine was that of an unseen architect, a nameless creator of their social triumph. The realization dawned slowly, persistently, like a tide creeping in, reshaping the coastline of my understanding. They saw my effort not as a personal achievement or a family celebration, but as an opportunity to entertain their friends, to be seen as generous hosts themselves, to bask in the reflected glory of something they hadn't funded, hadn't planned, and hadn't even truly attended as the guests of honor. My $15,000 gala had, in their eyes, become their private event, hosted for an audience they deemed more deserving, more worthy of their attention and their social capital. I began to notice small things, subtle shifts in their expectations, in their assumptions. When my mother would call, the conversation would often drift towards potential future events, hypothetical gatherings. "Wouldn't it be nice if we all did something like this again next year? Perhaps we could invite the Harrisons, they'd love it," she'd suggest, her voice laced with an unspoken implication that the blueprint was theirs to replicate and control. The implicit suggestion was clear. This was a template, a successful model they could easily duplicate and, crucially, direct. The quiet action wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a fiery confrontation or a public denouncement. It was a series of small, deliberate choices, a measured withdrawal of my unearned labor and emotional availability. When my father mentioned needing a ride to a golf tournament, and my mother asked if I could drive him, I politely said, "I'm afraid I'm busy that day." The truth was I wasn't. But the act of simply stating my unavailability, without elaborate excuses, was a departure from my usual accommodating nature. When they casually suggested I come over for dinner next Sunday, and I knew their friends, the ones who had occupied my seats, would be there, I replied, "I have prior commitments." My availability, once a boundless well from which they drew freely, a resource they assumed would always be there for their convenience, began to shrink. I didn't make excuses. I simply stated facts, the unvarnished truth of my schedule, my own developing life. My life, once an open book they felt entitled to read and annotate at their leisure, was being closed page by page with deliberate care. The real shift, the moment when the subtle recalibration became a definitive change, happened when my mother, in a tone of mild exasperation, asked why I hadn't mentioned my upcoming promotion to her bridge club. "Everyone else was talking about it," she'd said, her voice tinged with a hint of accusation, as if my professional success was an oversight on my part, a social faux pas, a deliberate withholding of information that should have been theirs to disseminate. I simply replied, "I haven't had the opportunity to share it with everyone yet." It was the truth, but it was also a subtle recalibration of my narrative. My sharing would be on my terms, when and with whom I chose. The power dynamic was subtly shifting, my agency being quietly reclaimed. The consequences weren't immediate fireworks, not a dramatic implosion of familial ties. Instead, there was a slow, steady unraveling of their familiar dominance, a gradual erosion of their unquestioned authority. My parents began to notice the silence, the casual invitations that went unanswered, the polite refusals. Their calls, once filled with assumptions of my availability and eagerness to please, started carrying a new undertone, a tentative questioning, a hint of bewilderment, a subtle anxiety that the predictable rhythm of our interactions was being disrupted. My father once asked, his voice laced with a genuine if belated concern, "Are you all right, dear? You seem a bit distant." I just smiled, a calm, composed smile that didn't quite reach my eyes, and said, "I'm doing very well, thank you for asking." The distance was intentional, a necessary space for healing and self-preservation. The social ripple wasn't grand or theatrical, but it was present, a subtle undercurrent in the social fabric of their lives. My parents' friends, the ones who had been so warmly welcomed into my gala, the ones who had enjoyed an evening of curated luxury at my expense, started to encounter awkward silences when they mentioned the event in other contexts. Some would ask my parents about me, about my involvement, about my role in orchestrating such a splendid affair, and my parents' responses, often evasive or dismissive, would raise eyebrows. There was a subtle disconnect forming, a quiet recognition among their social circle that perhaps my parents' narrative wasn't the whole story. They had, in essence, borrowed my success and presented it as their own, and the borrowing was becoming increasingly apparent, the seams of their story beginning to show. There was no grand confrontation, no tearful reconciliation, no dramatic declaration of independence, just a quiet redefinition of boundaries, a gentle but firm recalibration of the relationship. I had invested a significant amount of time, money, and emotional energy into creating something beautiful and meaningful, a celebration that was meant to be a marker of personal achievement and familial pride. When that was disregarded, repurposed, and ultimately stolen, the only way to reclaim any sense of justice, any semblance of equilibrium, was to reclaim myself. My quiet revenge wasn't about inflicting pain or seeking retribution. It was about withdrawing my energy, my attention, and my unearned labor from a dynamic that was fundamentally unbalanced and deeply unhealthy. Their seats at my gala were empty, a stark symbol of their absence and their betrayal. But the space they left in my life was slowly, deliberately, being filled with my own peace, my own rediscovered sense of self-worth, and a quiet, unwavering dignity.